jer si milostivi čovekoljubiv Bog i tebi slavu uznosimo, Otcu i Sinu i Svetome Duhu, sada i u vekove vekova.
In a world of shadows and secrets untold, where primeval stories make the brave go cold, mighty gods on high and realms below, whispers of legends that shape each soul. And nightmarish dreams, cryptids lurking, nothing's as it seems, giants walking, angels and demons fight, only truth can bring the light. Through the echoes of time, the tales unfold, mysteries arise as the prophecies are foretold, from valiant knights to buried treasure, this podcast brings nothing but pleasure. Welcome to myths, mysteries and majesty. Study with us, and don't be a travesty. Theology, mythology, fantasy, and horror. Dungeons and dragons, Skyrim and Mordor. And Mordor, phantom powers haunt the evening. In gothic castles where they're screaming, wizards cast spells in their towers tonight, exploiting enigmas hidden from our sight. Archaeologists make excavations deep of the ancient tombs where pharaohs sleep. In the dust of ages we chronicles keep, storytelling's power of monsters that creep. Mysteries and majesty is the place for you to learn about this haunted space. From scholarship to manuscripts of old, unlock the secrets of wisdom and gold.
Back in 1976, the former world number one atheist, Antony Flew, changed his mind while debating the famous Christian apologist, Dr. Warren. And this happened in the later years of Professor Antony Flew's life, so that atheist community started mocking him and calling him to be demented and too old to even know what he's talking about. So yeah, of course, if you're dying and you're hopeless, and yeah, of course you start believing in God, because what else can you lose? In response to the atheist community, and also to explain to everyone how his conversion happened, and it was merely on reason alone, there was no miracles, there was nothing supernatural, he didn't gain faith by reading the Bible, Dr. Flew wrote the book that we'll be assessing today. I have included the Amazon link in this video description. I believe that the book is currently on sale. You can buy it for only $8, a new book. So my new guest, Ernie Laurence, will be helping me dissecting this phenomenal conversion and story of, again, Dr. Antony Flew. But let's start first with Ernie. Ernie, thank you so much for finding time for the audience and myself. Can we please start by you introducing yourself, especially something when it comes about your spiritual and theological background?
Sure. I was raised by members of the Church of Christ. My father was an elder in the church, and I was immersed into Christ to have my sins washed away when I was about 11 in the spring of '86. And I have been a member of that faith ever since. I have grown up in that faith, stumbling along from time to time, just as everyone has, I'm sure, in their faith. But I've also spent a lot of time getting into apologetics and getting into reading debates and actually having debates with various groups of people, including atheists and evolutionists. I am a high school physics teacher in the public schools, so you can imagine being a young earth creationist a long time with that. How those two things are a bit of an adventure, if you will. Yeah, and I married a preacher's daughter, and I have 3 young kids, and my youngest was just baptized last week. So very excited about that.
Man, thank you so much. That's very interesting, and I had a feeling you were the perfect guest for this episode because I was like, I needed someone who wouldn't just read the book with me, but someone who already has some background and knowledge about apologetics, even more than me. So yeah, again, thank you so much for being available for us. But when it comes also to your work, you're a very prolific Christian fantasy author. You also make Christian tabletop games. Can you please share something about that? And I also want to say that I have shared with everyone Ernie's link to his work. So please, as much as you can, support brother's work. Everything what he does is very affordable. His work is very creative and entertaining. If you have kids, as a pastor or as a Christian parent, this will be a good choice to surprise your kids for either a birthday or a holiday, or in general now that we're in the summer break from school. So yeah, can you please share something about your novels and about your tabletop games?
Sure. So I started writing in the 6th grade, and I wrote for a long time. Didn't know what I was doing, of course, but I just wrote and wrote and wrote. And then I finished my first novel when I was a senior in high school, and then that kind of opened up the floodgates for me. Hey, I can write a novel, and I went on to write what I thought was 14 more novels at the time. Still didn't know what I was doing, but I was writing. And then I got married in 2005, and my wife read some of my work, and she's like, "This is really good. You should get published." And so I started down the trail of going to classes and learning how to do some self editing, and really what it was to get my stuff published. And turns out that most fantasy books clock in around 100,000 words, and those 15 novels that I had written were all over 300,000. And so I hadn't written 15 novels, I had written 45. And then what I ended up doing for the set that's published now as a 4-book series is I took the last book that I wrote, the 15th book that I wrote, and I broke it into not 3 but 4 novels. And they're published that way. They are the latest ones, so they're the most mature. They were the closest to being ready to polish. All of my fiction is clean fiction. There's no profanity, and there's no gratuitous sexuality or anything like that in it. I kind of look at things like Lord of the Rings, the movies, and I see that there's no profanity and no nudity whatsoever in it. And I'm like, if they can do it and they can do it that well, anybody can. Like it doesn't. And what I mean by that is that anybody can make good quality, clean content. They don't need that stuff, that extra stuff in it. And so that's kind of been a bit of a touchstone for me. And then for the last 7.5 years, if you hear some gunshots in the background, that's my father-in-law listening to the Apple Dumpling Gang. But for the last 7.5 years, I've been developing a tabletop gaming system. It's called Heroes Guild D10, and we have the player's handbook finished. I have one module that is available for purchase on what is it? Drive-by the drive-through RPG. Yeah, I think that's what it's called. But it kind of introduces the rule system to people who've never played the system before. Really kind of holds their hand and walks through. You can buy that. Player's handbook we're going to release when we get our Kickstarter up and running. We're doing some final few things on that. But again, everything that we produce officially is going to be clean fiction. And so there won't be anything in it that parents would struggle with. And ultimately, once the company really starts to move, we're going to move into video games. We're going to move into animated shows. And I hope, if I live long enough, live action shows. And all of it's going to be clean fiction. All of it will be internally rated. So if a parent sees the Heroes Guild publications sign on the video, and it's rated for somebody who's 7 and under, I can plop my kid down in front of that, and it's totally safe. And we don't ever produce anything that a teenager can watch or cannot watch because of, like I said, profanity and nudity and all that. Because violence is violence. You have your fantasy violence, you have your Lord of the Rings, but we'll probably stay close to the PG-13, if not the PG level of violence. So Lord of the Rings is about as hard as I want to go ever. So.
Yeah, thank you for that. I was about, while I was listening to you, I was thinking about our friend that podcast, PJ. He's also a Christian who is self-sponsoring himself. He wrote several lengthy PDFs when it comes to the rules and instructions for his tabletop games. And he's playing occasionally with their friends until it's officially published. So if interested, maybe I can connect you guys because he's also cool. And what you told me that you're doing, he's also doing.
Awesome.
Yeah. Okay. So when it comes to our topic, like we said, once when Professor Antony Flew converted, it brought like almost like a spiritual nuclear explosion in the atheistic world. They started insulting him. So I'm just going to be reading some quotations. It says, curiously, the response to the AP theory from Antony Flew's fellow atheists verged on hysteria. One atheist website tasked a correspondent with giving monthly updates on Flew's falling away from the true faith, and that would be, of course, atheism. Insults and juvenile caricatures were common in the free-thinking blogosphere. The same people who complain about the Inquisition and witches being burned at the stake were now enjoying a little heresy hunting on their own. The advocates of tolerance were not themselves being very tolerant. And apparently, religious zealots don't have a monopoly on dogmatism, fanaticism, and paranoia. This was such a, if I can put it this way, bombastic like introduction to the book. Like, as we can see, there was some sort of hypocrisy, if I can put it that way, even though I'm not trying to insult anyone directly, coming from our atheist friends. Everything that they will call religious people, now they start acting that way. So maybe if you can comment on that, and we'll start with this book's preface, and then we'll switch to the first chapter.
Yeah, I mean, like what you said, and facing that, I've seen that in people that I've talked to online, even students that I've had who maybe started off in terms of having those atheistic leaning, evolutionary leaning ideas. They are afraid of expressing interest in Christianity and in apologetics and in, hey, my physics, when I'm teaching physics, I can't preach Bible, but I can, through physics, lead them right up to the edge, and all they have to do is step over into, okay, the next step is obviously God created the universe. They're afraid to do that in a broader sense, and I can see what Flew might have faced because they are vicious. I say that knowing, like, getting on X is especially bad. There are a lot of those who call themselves Christians who are as vicious. And I will be honest, when I was younger, I was pretty hardcore myself. I did not pull punches, and I didn't go out of my way to be like mean. But when I go back and I read some of my older articles, and I go back and I look at some of the stuff that I did, I could have done better, a lot better. And so it's, I think, more of a testament to the way that humans in general are when it comes to having their, what they hold to be true, to be challenged. And then to see somebody who they look up to have that challenged, or to see that person veer away. Hey, I looked up to this guy and now he's changing sides. They don't like it. And so their first thought is not, hey, if he's changing his mind, maybe I should give it another look. Their first thing is to attack because they're scared. And I really think it is fear, is all of the things that they're holding on to. Now one of their champions, one of their leaders, has left their faith, because atheism is a faith just like any other. That leader has left the faith, and now they are frightened that maybe I have to give up all these things that I'm holding on to, because if he left, maybe my arguments aren't so great either. And people are starting to see that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it parallels perfectly the following quote. It says, the year of the new atheism, quote unquote, was 2006. And we know this because of Daniel Dennett, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, and others. And then it says, paradoxically, the books themselves by these authors read like fundamentalist sermons. The authors, for the most part, sound like hellfire and brimstone preachers, warning us of dire retribution, even of apocalypse. And if we don't repent of our wayward beliefs and associated practices, then woe to us, right? There's no room for ambiguity or subtlety. It's all black and white. It's like you're talking to people, coming from the Christian background. For them, everything is so easily black and white when it comes to sin or when it comes to truth. There's no ambiguity. There's no, I don't know, maybe. Everything is so clear for them. So this is how we would be with these famous atheist authors. And it says, either you're with us all the way or one with the enemy. Even eminent thinkers who express some sympathy for the other side are denounced as traitors. So as we can see, this toxic trait can come up with religious people or non-religious people. Ernie, in your experience, how it is difficult to tell someone who is a skeptic or agnostic without trying to insult them, without trying to commit ad hominem attacks? Like, hey man, or sir, or whatever you call them, don't you think that this, what you believe or what you reject, is not based on reason or does not make sense? If I provide you sources, if I provide you some evidence or proof, at least proof, maybe not evidence that they will consider as evidence, wouldn't you want to consider, why would you be so close-minded? Why would you, or even if I would tell you about God and the gospel, why would you want to yell at me or threaten me? So we see this type of anger in many of our friends who are, on the other side, especially people who deconverted one time in the past from Christianity to atheism. Were you ever able to psychologically analyze the profile of this regular type of atheist who deconverted and now is angry and feeling like they have a mission to tell everyone online?
Well, so there's two things, two major factors I would say are important when you're dealing with somebody who is of a different faith. And again, I'm going to broaden this out because atheism is just a faith, and you treat it just like any other kind of belief system. And so the first of those is going to be environment, the environment that you are in, and their peers have a lot to do with that. So if you have, for me, it was, I converted several of my students out of either atheism or agnosticism or whatever, because I had spent a lot of time in apologetics and know that the Bible does have answers for everything. Like it's not just a platitude. The Bible does have answers for everything, every challenge they could bring up. When you have somebody who's seeking knowledge and you're in an environment where you don't have as much of that kind of peer pressure where everybody is saying, if you convert, we're going to denounce you, you're going to lose all your friends, you're going to lose your job, that kind of stuff. And in the student arena, again, not in the classroom, but just outside of class, where those conversations would take place, I found a lot more fruitful work there. The same as when you encounter somebody in person versus online. You go online, it's very, very difficult to, environmentally wise, to get somebody to even hear you and understand what you're saying, because there's so much toxicity in the environment itself that the people who might listen to you aren't going to speak up, at least not in a public way. Now, will somebody message you in your private messages and have a conversation that way? Certainly. And that's why it's important to have that presence on something like X or Facebook or something. But when you get into arguments back and forth, you're not going to have all that great of success in the public arena. That brings me to the other idea. The other idea is, and this is a hard lesson for me when I had to learn, and it really took my wife bringing me down to a more gentler spirit. The spirit that you approach people, whatever they're doing, the spirit that you approach people is really going to be a huge factor in the way that you get people to open up to you and listen to you. And so if you approach people with this antagonistic, aggressive, it's me versus you, Whereas if you approach from the gentle, I really care about your soul. I really believe you're lost and want you to be saved. And you try to show people that you care about them, not worried so much about what they believe, but I actually care about you as an individual. That's also a huge factor in dealing with successfully talking to somebody who is of another persuasion. And then the last thing you have to learn is there's people. It's kind of a modification of the line from Batman. Some people just want to watch the world burn. There are some people who they just are out there to light fires, to fight, to troll. Um, you got to learn who those people are pretty quick, and you kind of cut them off. You don't let them have access to your conversations, because they're going to light the fires under somebody who might otherwise, they're tainting the environment to somebody who might otherwise listen and go back and forth and finally hear what you're saying, like Flew was able to do. Like when he started traveling in broader circles and confronting people like Warren, um, he was able to break out of that kind of echo chamber that he had been in and start hearing great arguments from people who demonstrated care for him as an individual, which Warren did all throughout the debate. He was highly complimentary of him the entire time, said he was the best person. If he wasn't the best person, we would have found somebody else. And just all through, he lifted Flew as a person up, but then brought down all of his arguments in a very, very handy manner. it was it was a one-sided thing, really. If you ever have a chance to watch it or listen to it, it's on YouTube. You can find it from World Video Bible School, and it's a trouncing. So
Yeah, we'll soon talk about it in maybe 5-10 minutes. It's interesting when you mention the word faith related to atheism, because Antony Flew uses the same thing when it comes to Richard Dawkins. He says Dawkins himself has elsewhere confessed that his atheistic view of the universe is based on faith. When asked by Edge Foundation, what do you believe is true, even though you cannot prove it, Dawkins replied, I believe that all life, all intelligence, all creativity, and all design anywhere in the universe is the direct or indirect product of Darwinian natural selection. It follows that design comes late in the universe after a period of Darwinian evolution. Design cannot precede evolution and therefore cannot underlie the universe. At bottom, then, Dawkins's rejection of an ultimate intelligence, capital I, is a matter of belief without proof. Ernie, is it just me, or Dawkins has everything upside down? He thinks that intelligence and intelligent design will come after evolution. How would that even work? Wouldn't it make sense that that will have to precede any potential evolution, anything that will come after that?
well, yeah, and I mean, you can get into the apologetics arguments at this point to demonstrate that, but to really bring it back to Flew and what he had to fight against. There's one of the big arguments that Warren brought against him was, you're in this box, in this center of boxes, and to get out of all of these boxes to get to where you need to be for your position to be true, you have to get matter from nothing. You have to get morality from that which is immoral or amoral. You have to get consciousness from that which isn't conscious. You have to get intelligence from that which isn't intelligent. Like, there were 7 boxes that he had to get through, and people like Dawkins and these other guys who are the kind of the new apologists for the 21st century or late 20th century, I guess, their arguments are almost entirely assertion without any kind of evidence that leads to the proofs that demand the conclusions that they want us all to believe. A lot of their argumentation is making statements, making assertions, and then having the person that they're talking to kind of bridge to the conclusion that they want to make, but they don't ever actually make a single sound argument. They don't, in the classical formal sense, none of them actually make those arguments. It's really a lot about kind of bullying and asserting, and there's a type of argument that's made very, very often. I actually went up against a guy at a board meeting one time. He was the biology teacher trying to foist evolution off onto our students, which is actually against Florida law. You can't teach evolution as true in Florida. You can only teach it as a possibility, as a theory, as one of many possibilities. And so I went against him, and his entire argument was this ad veracundium argument, which is, believe me, I'm a professional. Believe me, I'm a scientist, and you should just take my say so. That was all he argued for 10 minutes. And you see that with Dawkins and these other guys now, is like, well, you don't, you're not really this or that. You see it in like the climate change, or you see it in the evolution. Well, you're not really a biologist. You're a physicist. What do you know about it? And they try to use that professional stance that they have, that the letters behind their name, to try to browbeat people into agreeing with them. Well, who am I? I'm just a high school physics teacher. What do I know against somebody who has a doctorate in microbiology or something like that? Well, I happen to know, because I've been going at this I'm 50 years old. I've been doing this now for probably 35 years. So I don't have a degree, but yeah, I can hang with those guys.
Yeah, it's interesting how people like Dawkins, with all due respect to people like him, I don't think that they know their boundaries. I don't think you're very qualified, if you're someone like Dawkins, to talk about if there is God or not. That's not your field of expertise. Of course, you can state your mind, just like I can state my mind about, I don't know, quantum mechanics, but I cannot prove anything. So for him to be so popular in his atheistic books, they're almost considered as manifestos, where he's trying to supposedly provide evidence there is no God. It's hilarious. I mean, he's of course perfectly allowed to speak his mind, but I would rather listen to, if I would have to pick an atheist, I would rather pick an atheistic philosopher, or someone who knows theology, or someone who can speak with me on that, on the level that we maybe read the same sources, the same scholars. With someone like Dawkins, I don't think that they have not that they don't have ability, but they didn't school themselves in that way to think like philosophers. And philosophy, I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry. Philosophy deals with more difficult questions than science. Philosophy goes way further. So I'd rather chat with a philosopher, even if I'll disagree with them, than with a scientist. Last thing, when it comes to this preface, is very interesting. When asked on a visit to Jerusalem if he believed in the existence of God, the famous, now former, theoretical physicist Stephen Hawking is reported to have replied that he did believe in the existence of God, but that this divine force, with capital D, established the laws of nature and physics, and after that does not enter to control the world. And I will have to say, Ernie, I don't know if you share the same sadness, but this is actually very sad to see God, who once created us, and it's like a parent who is, just alcoholic or drug abuser, just left his children, left his wife. He doesn't care about them, what happens to them. He's a God of theism. He's a God of like, I don't care about what happens to you. I'm gonna go and like mind my own business. But also, what bugs me is that if you're like Stephen Hawking, who passed away in the meantime after this book was published, yeah. But if you're a scientist of any sort, of any type of, any sort of scientist, and you believe that there's a sort of creator, but then you focus most of your life, most of your career on science, on evolution, on the Big Bang, why don't you also spend some of your energy and effort trying to find out who is the maker of the Big Bang, who is the author of everything? Why would you just spend and focus most of your life on creation, instead of like, hey, what's preceding that? Especially if Stephen Hawking, what he said, that, yeah, I believe there was a creator, but he left us. But don't you still want to know how, or at least try to know how he made us, why he made us? Those big questions, they're way bigger than like, hey, how old is the universe? These are important questions. But the more important question is, the question about the creator, the maker. Does he love me? Does he care about me? Does he know that I exist? How he feels when I'm suffering? Does he know when I'm crying? Does he know that my beloved one died even though I prayed for them? About some stuff like that, they're deeper parts of my soul, way deeper than the vastness of the universe. So I'm lamenting for any scientist out there who believes in some sort of a deity, yet does not spend any time of their career trying to find out the identity, even if it's a false identity, but try to spend your time researching about the identity of this creator rather than, oh yeah, I believe, but that God is not with us. Let's rather focus on creation. Is it just me, or that's it? Or that's like focusing on things that are of way less importance. Like, how can you spend your whole life and die thinking, oh yeah, I fulfilled my life, I fulfilled my goal, I gave myself to science, I tried to explore all these things, yet the elephant in the room, if I can call it God with that way, without trying to be disrespectful, of course, has been there the whole time. You try not to spend time with him. You try not to identify this deity. For me, I'm lamenting. I don't know about you. I just want to ask you your opinion about this.
Well, yeah. So, and again, because I travel in several different circles, in different environments, there is a sadness that comes when you have somebody who the truth is very evident. It's you can see that they see it, but because like somebody like Dawkins, who is going to hold on to, because his whole reputation and income is based on ragging on Christians and promoting atheism and evolution and stuff. That's very hard to turn from, and you just kind of breaks your heart. And then you see people like Flew and Hawking, who are right there, and they see through the science. Paul talked about that in Romans chapter 1, 20 and 21, that the invisible things of God are seen through the creation, and they see it. They're looking at God's creation because that's what they're so enamored with. And I'm a physicist. That's what I'm enamored with too. I love God's creation and the laws that he set up. Um, and through that, they're finally able to see God, but then for whatever reason, they don't take that next step, and they don't want to have that relationship with him that he wants to have with his creation. And so they don't take the next step. They ask the what, but they don't ask the why. The biggest question that we can ask is, why am I here? And they don't ask that question. They don't want to know that, because again, I think it comes back to fear. I think they're afraid of the answer, and I think they're afraid of the things that they'll have to give up, and they're afraid of the things that they'll have to commit to if they find out that answer. And it feels safe and comfortable for them to, okay, yeah, there's a God, and he gave us the universe. I'm cool with that. And then that's it. And they miss out on so much. They miss out on all those blessings that are in Christ because of it.
Okay, thank you for that. Now we'll be starting with the beginning of the book. Actually, this was more of a background. And by the way, I prepared 6,500 words for tonight. There's no way we'll cover even half of it, because I took notes from 8 chapters, and I think I took too many notes. So if we have to make sequel or stop at one point, it is what it is. So after the debate in 1976, sometime after that, Dr. Antony Flew said this famous statement. He said, "I now believe there is a God," with exclamation point. And again, this came after the debate. Ernie, I know you have some slides or pictures you would like to share with us. And then if you can please summarize what was the main point or the main argument that Dr. Thomas Warren made that in return made Dr. Antony Flew change his mind and end the debate from atheist to theist, to actually thinking, oh, there is a God, even though I don't know if he made ever that conclusion before he passed away, that God was Christ.
Yeah, sure. So let me share the screen here, and I'll show you a few of the slides that. So these are slides from that debate, from the debate with Warren that he had. This is one of Warren's top arguments. I still use this argument today. It's a very powerful argument. And so what he does is he goes through and he sets forth some very formal arguments that Flew needs to address in terms of atheism's clinging to evolution. And I know that those two aren't necessarily hand in hand. I know that there's some theistic evolutionists out there, but atheism itself right now really requires that evolution be true. They don't have another position. And even back in the time of this debate, that was the case. And so you see here that Warren presents this argument. So I've got the title here, and then you've got the rest of the argument here. It's creation versus evolution. Those are the only two possibilities, right? Either God created us through special creation, or evolution we got here through unintelligent random events that eventually brought us to where we are today. Those are the only two possibilities. There's no other possibility that exists between Flew and Warren, because between the two of them they reject all other possibilities. And so those are the only two that are left. And so then the next one says, if creation is true, then God must be true. So the idea that if creation is true, it demands that conclusion that God is true. But if evolution is true, then you have this idea here of something that was not human was either born from or transformed from, or, I'm sorry, that which is human was born from, or that which is was born from that which is not human, or transformed from that which is not human. And so Flew then answered some questions that they had exchanged before the time, and even admitted in the debate that humans were not born of. He has apes here just because it's short, but you'll hear Warren talk about that which is not human. He knows it's not apes. He knows it's ape-like creatures, but that Flew said not born. Humans are not born from that which is not human, and they're not transformed from that which is not human. And so since those two admissions were made by Flew, then Warren says, well, if it's not born and it's not transformed, then it's not born or transformed from De Morgan's theorem. And if that's not true, go back to 3, then evolution can't be true. If evolution's not true, then creation must be true from 1. And if creation's true, then God's true. And Flew could not address this. Like, this argument was not something that he floundered, and he kind of hemmed and hawed, and you can see that Flew really had a focus on philosophy and not biology, because this type of argument where there's a precision that's demanded in defining what is a human really threw him. And then some of the other ones you have. This is Warren hitting him on the contradictions of Flew versus himself. And so Flew wants to affirm oughtness in terms of there are things we must do morally, because Flew was around during World War II, and he saw all the horrible things that were going on, and saw that there was objective real evil. They talked a lot about the Nazis, and Flew could not bring himself to say that morality was subjective. And so there was this oughtness that Flew, his conscience, would not allow him to ignore. And Warren hit him on that. And then the contradictions that set up, Warren just jumped on him. And by the time you get to the last night of the debate, Flew is just backpedaling and stumbling and whatever. They talked a lot about law, like what law were, like moral law, were the Germans under, because if they were under the German law, they didn't break any laws. They weren't under the law of England. But when you get to the Nuremberg trials, they appealed to a higher law to condemn those who were part of that. Flew did not really address that very well at all. He tried to talk about humanity, and he talked about social constructs and stuff like that. But it was, again, Warren had read his stuff and knew where Flew was coming from and was ready for him, essentially. And this is probably the most famous one, because this is still used today. Christian apologists use this today. You have Flew in the center of this, and you have this eternality of matter. Either matter has always been here, which was called the steady state theory for a while, or it began. And if it began, if it had a beginning, then how did it begin? Because it can't come from nothing. And so that was the first box. And then you have life from that which was not alive. And all the way through all of these, you can see conscience and intelligence and then human beings and all of this, these steps that Flew has to take that he can't. He can't even take the first one. And no atheist today can do it. They cannot come from nothing and ultimately end up with where we are today. And those are all the steps that they must take, and they can't even take one today. They'll hem and they'll haw. If you get an atheist talking about where life came from in abiogenesis versus the law of biogenesis, which Warren brings up, they don't have an answer. And they'll say something along the lines of, well, we're talking biology here. We're not talking about that's chemistry. And they'll blow it off. They'll sidestep. They can't answer it, and they have no idea. And then when you talk about where did the universe come from? Well, they say the Big Bang. No, the Big Bang is the universe. Where did the material that exploded come from? And they again don't have an answer. Well, it was quantum fluctuations in the nothingness. No, see, the definition of nothing is absolute nothing. If I have nothing in my hand, nothing is going to happen to the nothingness. And they have to redefine those words, and you find that a lot when you get into debating. You have to be. I've taught physics for 17 years now. I've told my kids, you have to be precise in your definitions. If you don't nail down your definitions when you get into an argument, that is where they're going to get you. And if you hold them to their to the definitions and you say, no, this is the definition of that word, then the people who are trying to build straw men, or they're trying to escape from an argument they can't deal with, they're going to try to redefine words, and you have to hold them to those precise definitions, because that's where almost every debate is won, is in those definitions. And Warren, we've talked about it beforehand. Flew started off as a hardcore atheist. He said, I am an atheist, and if you take the agnostic position, you're a coward. Like he said, you're a coward. And by the end of his debate with Warren, I've got to take the agnostic position because I'm not really sure anymore. That's how hardcore Warren hit him. He didn't make the final step over into theism yet, but you just have this 1 4-night debate. And that's how powerful Warren was as a debater, as a philosopher. He was on Flew's home turf, and he owned him. It was pretty awesome. I highly recommend anybody, if you have the time. It's kind of dry. Flew's not a great public speaker, but if you can handle it, Warren is not only a philosopher and a great debater, he's a gospel preacher. So he's got that, and I will tell you, he's got that kind of voice. And so he's easier to listen to because he draws you in. But it's a great debate to watch. Masterclass.
I don't know if you watched Antony Flew's debate with William Lane Craig. If you did, was that a more entertaining or better debate? But also, when I say better, that's, I'll have to be precise which way better. Would it be maybe more easier to understand for people who are not so much into science or theology? Was it more persuasive? Or maybe William Lane Craig didn't have as many good arguments as late Dr. Warren? Which debate, if you watch both, which debate would you pick?
I haven't seen the second debate, but I definitely want to. Like, that's one of the things that's kind of on my to-do soon list. You know how you have a to-do list and you're eventually going to get to all of it one day? No, I'm going to do this at some point during the summer, I think, to watch that debate. I've seen Craig talk. I don't necessarily agree with everything he says, but the way that he talks is very much along those lines of kindness and caring that you have to have. And I think the way that he presents things, he's aware that a lot of the people that are consuming his content are your everyday people like you and I, and not just like the super eggheads out there like Flew. And I think he presents things in a way. And so I could imagine that his debate is a lot like that. Warren was presenting that way already. When he was doing the debate, he wasn't trying to be pie in the sky, being so esoteric with his terminology and everything that you can't understand it. Anybody can read through and understand. It's just so thick. There's so much that if you're watching the video, you're going to have to pause and maybe take notes and think your way through it. Okay, I got that. But it's not above anybody. And so I would think that Craig's debate with him would be along those same lines. I can imagine that the effect that he had on Flew, you're going to see the same kind of transformation over the course of the debate with Flew that you saw in the Warren debate, moving him further and further towards that theistic thinking.
Okay, thank you for that. When we go back to Antony Flew's childhood, he said that he was a son of a preacher, which you mentioned at the very beginning. And there, when I was reading about his biography as a teenager, I found something sad. He said, I could never see the point of worship and have always been far too unmusical to enjoy or even participate in hymn singing. I never approach any religious literature with the same unrestrained eagerness with which I consume books on politics, history, science, or anything else. Going to chapel or church, saying prayers, and all other religious practices were for me matters of more or less weary duty. Never did I feel the slightest desire to commune with God. And then he says something even worse, but I'm glad he was honest. He says, nor do I think I ever felt my mind enchanted or my heart strangely warmed, to use John Wesley's famous phrase, in Christian study or worship. Whether my youthful lack of enthusiasm for religion was a cause or effect, or both, who can say? But I can say that whatever faith I had when I entered this Kingswood private Christian school was gone by the time I finished. Um, uh, this is so difficult. Ernie, you're an educator. You're not teaching theology, but you love theology. You love God. You love kids, and you love your job. I know this may be a difficult question, but if let's say, we work in secular settings where it's not allowed for us to proselytize or include God in our work, we can mention, but not to go too deep with it. Fine. But for us as working and volunteering in churches, how much do you think it's our responsibility to raise the next generation of kids and teenagers, helping them with questions, tough questions, not just, hey, I opened this tough passage in the Bible, it's hard, but with apologetics, with evil in the world, with so many other religions, with cults, with evolution, with Big Bang, so many other questions, sexual questions, because these are the things that will be on the mind of teenagers. How much do you think would be theology classes and apologetics? What would be the importance of them being included more in the sermons, and also adult and teenage studies in the church, that will help them once when they go to school, they wouldn't lose faith because they will be bombarded by so many atheistic arguments, that they will be prepared, both spending time with God in the Bible and prayer, but also learning apologetics, a little bit philosophy, a little bit science, so that once when they go, they will be like, oh, I never heard about this, I never heard about that, I don't know what to tell you. They would already have some roots besides Christ, that they'll have in knowledge, in philosophy, in theology. How do you think this is important? Because as I see from many Pentecostal and charismatic churches, this is where they're lacking a lot. So many times when they say, oh, someone got saved, how do you know they got saved? I'm not God, you're not God. They just raised their hand and they repeated words after your prayer. I hope they're saved. I don't know if they're false converts or not. Many people, once when they leave that type of setting and they go out in the world, so to speak, a number of them turn out to be later as deconverting, because they were never deeply rooted. And I'm lamenting, because I see this need in churches for pastors to be theologians, for theologians volunteering and teaching our kids important lessons. So for you as an educator, do you see the same thing that we're lacking in American church?
That is a very, very big question. There's a lot of ways that I can approach that, and a lot of ways that I could answer that, and it'd probably take me hours upon hours and really digging down into that. Number one, I'm probably going to have a little bit different view about the way salvation works than a lot of people who view your channel. The churches of Christ have a very specific view that's different, and I don't want to necessarily get into the conflict, but we believe that faith is required before you can be saved. You make the confession that Christ is the Son of God. You turn from your sins and towards God. You have to repent of that. You're turning towards the light and away from darkness, essentially. And then we believe that your sins are washed away when you're baptized, when you're immersed into the water. God's applying the blood in the water. It's not the water that saves you, but it's the blood of Christ that saves you, but God applies it in the water. And so we talk about people who are baptized, just like my youngest was baptized a week ago, coming up. But then what do we do after that when that person is saved? Because we do believe that the Bible teaches that one can fall away, that you can throw away your salvation. It's not something that, oops, I lost my salvation. It's kind of a one-off thing, but you can reject. And we see this so often, like when our children go off to colleges, like you were talking about, they encounter atheism and they encounter these arguments, and they run into these things that they're ill-equipped to deal with. How does that affect their faith, such that many of them leave the faith and they apostatize, and what I believe is that they're rejecting their salvation, and they are now in a lost state again. And what do we do about that? I have worked with a number of congregations. I've worked with those who are weak congregations. They don't have any grounding in the faith. Everything is a very shallow, very surface kind of social type gathering. They cross the T's and dot the I's. You're there in the pew, and then they don't want to dig deep. They don't have any hunger. And then I have been part of amazing congregations where the entire congregation, like the congregation I'm with right now, the entire congregation is well versed in the Bible and is well able to answer all of these questions. And the key, I think, and this comes from having experienced so many different kinds of congregations, including those of the denominations, the ones that are seeing their students continue in the faith afterwards are those who, after the child is of an age to understand, the parents are the primary responsibility for teaching their children. And if the parents are daily talking, and it doesn't have to be a sit down formal Bible study every night, that's great if you can do that, and you should do that. But just any time anything comes up, because God is always on your mind as a parent, your answers always reflect God in them. And so when your kids are dealing with friends they meet, if they're in public school, or if they run into kids in the neighborhood, or some adult gives an offhand comment, or if I'm talking to like my students in high school and they're encountering these things, if God is in your answer on a daily basis, then you're going to see that reflected in the next generation. Is it the congregation's responsibility to prepare the children for encountering these things? To an extent, but the greater responsibility lies in the parents. And I believe that the greatest failures come when a parent relies on the church to do it all. Oh, my kids went to Bible class. They've got everything they need to know. No, the reason that I am the way that I am, and I've got 3 younger brothers, and they're just like me, poor guys. They're not as good looking and they're not as intelligent, but otherwise they're just like me. The reason that we are the way that we are is because of, first of all, my dad. My dad was what I just described. His answers reflected God in everything. Whenever we had any kind of question about anything, it was dating or baseball or football, or I was in one act play when I was in high school, it didn't matter. Whatever his answers were, God was present in the answers. And so I grew up 24/7 with God as part of my life. And that's, I think, what strengthened my brothers and I. And I give that respect to my dad, who then will just turn around and give it to God. God commanded me to do that. God said, walk in the light. God said, study to show yourself approved. God's the one that said that all scripture is given by inspiration and thoroughly furnishes unto every good work. He got into the Bible, and then he taught us every day. And my mom followed his leadership. She was the same way. And so the family, the environment that I grew up in is what helped me. And I think if we focus on that, and I think that the congregation that I'm a part of now does the same thing. The lion's share of the responsibility is on the dad and on the family to equip them. And then, yes, the congregation can then offer a shoring up of those things. Maybe you have somebody that has a more of a scientific background like me, who can give a more of a physics apologetics kind of crash course, or somebody who has taken philosophy or who has had experience dealing with the atheists, or the Hindus, or the very weird religions that are out there, like the Mormons or the Jehovah's Witness. You have somebody who's got experience, maybe even came out of those faiths, and they can teach, hey, here's the specifics. That's good. That's a good supplement. But ultimately, the strength of salvation is the Bible itself. Everything that we could do as Christians, that every answer that we can give comes from the Bible and knowing the Bible. And if you know the Bible well, and I don't mean know it as a bunch of isolated memory verses. My children don't memorize memory verses. I don't like that style of teaching, but understanding the Bible as an organic whole, as a message from God, and reading it through in the way that it was written to us, and understanding it and reading it through and starting to connect everything, then when you understand it that way, your faith becomes unshakable. There is no way anybody could ever convince me that there isn't a God. And it's because the Bible is that powerful.
Thank you so much. I'm hoping that Christian parents watching this, either live or in the days and weeks to come, will get this sound advice from you, as well as pastors. And like you said, responsibility is both. Like, it has to start at home, and hopefully, if parents don't know something more advanced, hopefully someone in the church will teach them. But nonetheless, I think it will be responsibility for all of us. Last thing when it comes to the first chapter is that Antony Flew had something common with his dad, namely that both of them were pursuing wisdom. However, that wisdom took him the opposite way compared to his dad. He said that I reached the conclusion about the non-existence of God later seemed to me the wrong reasons. One of those early reasons for my conversion to atheism was the problem of evil. The second one was free will. And then he gives example of something really horrible that he noticed when he was traveling during the years before even World War II started. He said, I vividly recalled the banners and signs outside small towns in Europe proclaiming Jews not wanted here. So he was observing evil in the world, Ernie, like all of us are. Today, that may not be that slogan, but it can be something that we can all relate. We notice crimes. We see babies dying in children, in car accidents, or maybe, dying of tumor or cancer. We see airplane accidents. We tend to see sometimes all the negative things instead of all focusing on being grateful and also seeing the hand of God in our lives, and how many times we get what we don't deserve in a good way, because mercy and grace are shown to us. So my question to you, and again, I know that we can talk about this for hours, but this is the old got you atheistic false dilemma that they try to portray on Christians. They're like, well, if God is so powerful, how did he created this imperfect world? Because he was either impotent or not loving enough. I'm just roughly paraphrasing because I don't have the exact same statement in front of me, but we all know how they would try to, get you to either say that God is not, all powerful or all loving. What would you say to someone like that who try to who sees only evil and not good, and who try to tell you, but Ernie, how can you believe in this all loving and all powerful God when you see that the world is collapsing and failing and there's so much evil and suffering around us? Where's your God? How come he doesn't do anything? What would be your response within a couple of minutes or few minutes?
Well, typically what I do is I have them define what evil is, because if they define evil as that which is objectively morally wrong, then they are admitting there's a moral lawgiver. If they say that evil exists, they must say that God exists, because otherwise evil doesn't actually exist. It's just a matter of preferences. And I'll even go back to the Warren Flew debate. That's exactly what Warren hit him with, is that if you say that there is objective evil, then you must say that there is something that defines what that evil and that good is, and it cannot just be your preferences. And so he would talk about the Nazis, what you brought up about what Flew witnessed in his youth, well, this horrible hatred for the Jews before the Holocaust. And then, of course, World War II itself. When those things came about, Warren knew that was evil. His conscience wouldn't let him say otherwise, and he never said otherwise. Those were evil things, and so in recognizing the evil, you recognize the existence of God. You turn the argument on its head. If they're going to argue that evil exists, then you have to then take the step of, if there's an objective thing such as evil, it's not just your preferences, then you have to accept that there is a moral lawgiver. And that's the way I typically answer it. Of course, you can go on from there. They'll hem and they'll haw, and there's ways to deal with each of those things. But the main thing is just turn that argument around on them and bring it up. Then they're lost at that point.
Okay, thank you. When it comes to chapter 2 that he titled Where the Evidence Leads, I'll just focus on one thing because I'm trying to save time. When it comes to free will, he says this is a main topic at the heart of most major religions. In my earliest anti-theological writings, I had drawn attention to the incongruity of evil in a universe created by an omnipotent, all-good being. The theist response to this perceived incongruity, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce this word, incongruity.
That's close enough.
Okay, thanks. Was the claim that God gives humans free will and that all or most of the obvious and scandalous evils are immediately or ultimately due to misuse of this dangerous gift, but that the end result will be the realization of a sum of greater goods than would otherwise be possible. I was, in fact, the first to label this free will defense. I responded by trying to have it both ways by introducing a position now known as compatibilism. Now he goes to explain, the what he currently believes and how he changed mind, and he concluded that he does not believe that basically determinism and free will can work together, which is what compatibilism encompasses. I just wanted to ask you, how do you see this change of mind and this understanding in the moment of his penning this chapter of his book? Would you agree with his philosophical stand or not? And if you would disagree, if you can please briefly explain why and how.
Again, I believe the Bible is very, very clear that man has free will, that as an act of love, and that's really where this boils down to. God's love is what prompted him to create us with the ability to choose him or not. He wants us to choose to be in that relationship with him. He wants us to choose to love him and to accept the love that he offers to us. And so if we understand that God is an all-loving God, and this is where evil is going to come into this picture, is when mankind chooses not to love God and not to accept God. That's where evil comes from, is us choosing the opposite of love. And when when you look at what Flew was arguing in terms of free will, he was trying to reconcile a number of things that he had heard, a number of things that he had encountered. Um, Calvinism was very strong. Without getting into some negative labeling here, you have the Augustinian tradition coming through. You have this philosophy that God is sovereign, and defining sovereign means that God meticulously determines everything. Well, that's not what sovereign means, but that's what Flew was encountering at that time, because Calvinism was very strong in Europe during the time that he was encountering all of these arguments in terms of Christianity. And so that's what he had to deal with. But he also recognized that free will exists. It's obvious that we operate, even a Calvinist will operate as if free will is true. Any kind of determinist has to functionally operate as if free will is true. And so he recognized that, and that's why he thought of compatibilism. And then as he came along, he recognized that's just a contradiction. I'm trying to affirm a contradiction between that which says you have no free will and that which is free will, and that doesn't work. So I'm going to give up the thing that I can't prove to be true, which is determinism, and understand that there's a different way to define God's sovereignty than determinism. And that's what left him with free will. And I think that broke up the logjam for him in a lot of ways, as he moves past his discussion with Craig, that really moved him towards, that allowed him to move towards deism, is because he could then say, oh, God isn't the source of evil. I know evil exists, and I know God exists. If God determines everything, then God determined evil. I think that's a huge hangup for a lot of people. And when he was able to reconcile that and dump the determinism, then he was left with, okay, I can now believe in God, because now humanity is really the source of evil. Our rejection of God's love is.
Thank you. I think both you and I have a lot of similar views, which is very encouraging and very cool. When we skip to the next chapter, which he titled Atheism Calmly Considered, I love the following segment. He mentions how a certain gentleman formed his cosmological argument, and I want to ask you, what do you think about this? Dr. Terry, Miethe. I will probably butcher his last name, so I don't even want to try to pronounce it. But for Dr. Flew, he said that this gentleman, a Christian scholar, made this formidable version of the cosmological argument that is based on the following premises. Number one, some limited changing being or beings exist. Number two, the present existence of every limited changing being is caused by another. Number three, there cannot be an infinite regress of causes of being, because an infinite regress of finite beings would not cause the existence of anything. And conclusion 4, therefore, there is a first cause of the present existence of these beings. The first cause must be infinite, necessary, eternal, and one. The first uncaused cause is identical with the God of the Judeo-Christian tradition. I don't know about you, but I found this because I heard different types, usually one by William Lane Craig, cosmological argument, to be so cool. But this is a different one, probably even expanded. So I wanted to ask you, what do you think about this one? Because even Flew, well, he was still debating with himself if does God exist. He found this argument to be very solid.
Yeah, it's an excellent argument. I like the argument from dealing with the infinite regression. You know, we've seen it before in talking about the infinite universe. If the universe is eternal, it's always been here. Then you have an infinity, and the argument is, well, how did we get to here? How did we get to this point, right? But when you approach it from the idea of the infinite series of causes, doesn't explain the overall, like where how did these begin in the first place? How did we get the laws that lead to the next in the chain or whatever? excuse me, then ultimately you circle back to this first cause. It's similar to what I tend to argue with my students at the beginning of every school year. We talk about what is time. I have them define space and time, and that's not as easy as what it sounds. If you try to define space and you try to define time, especially if you're a teenager, you use the words constantly, but you don't really have a working definition of those. So it forces that, and then I get them to define matter and energy, which are much easier to do. And then I say, well, you either have matter as eternal and has always been here, or mind. And I'll bring up there's a man named Sir John Eccles. He was a Catholic, but he was a neurophysiologist, won the Nobel Peace Prize for his work between the idea of the brain and the mind. He showed that he conclusively showed that there is a separation between those two things, that the brain is just kind of like a computer and we're driving it, but the mind is our true self and it is metaphysical in nature, and that it can operate when there's no brain activity whatsoever. And so I'll show them as like, you've either got matter or you've got mind that's eternal. And if the mind is eternal, or if matter can be shown to not be eternal, then all you're left with is mind. And so it gets into this idea of cause and effect, which is, in physics, that's the bread and butter, right? We're studying the effect to try to recreate the cause so that we can reproduce the effect on an applicable level. And so this idea of the infinite series of causes and the argument that's made from that, very much like when you're talking about evolution and natural selection. Natural selection doesn't provide a mechanism that causes the transition from this animal to this animal. It just explains the survival of what's already here. And so you need to have a different mechanism. In the same way with this idea of the infinite series of causes, you have an observation of what is supposedly happening with this, but you don't have an explanation of the actual mechanism for what is the causing of this infinite series of causes. And it's fantastic, and I don't think it has an answer. So I like it a lot.
Yeah, thank you for that. He said that after he debated a number of Christian apologists and philosophers, including Warren, William Lane Craig, Plantinga, Swinburne, and others, then when he attended this symposium at New York University in May 2004, to the surprise, and I would add probably shock of everyone there, he said that he became a theist or a deist. He didn't confess belief in the biblical God because he had his own reasons why to reject him. But then he started changing his mind and publicly admitting that. And now we're switching to the topic that you are super familiar with because, again, you're a teacher. And this is very interesting because he's talking about the origin of life. And he says, yes, I now think that almost entirely because of the DNA investigations, that there's activity in creative intelligence. He says, what I think the DNA material has done is that what it has shown by the almost unbelievable complexity of the arrangements which are needed to produce life, that intelligence must have been involved in getting these extraordinary, diverse elements to work together. It's the enormous complexity of the number of elements and the enormous subtlety of the ways they work together. The meeting of these two parts at the right time by chance is simply minute. It is all a matter of the enormous complexity by which the results were achieved, which look to me like the work of intelligence. This statement represented a major change, of course, for me, but it was nevertheless consistent with the principle that I have embraced since the beginning of my philosophical life: the following of argument, no matter where it leads. And I was like, wow, thank God that he was intellectually honest. So I believe you can talk about the following topic for hours because this is your passion, this is your education, this is what you know. But when it comes to his statement on DNA investigations, that leads inevitably to the activity of a creative intelligence, as he says, Ernie, how many scientists are there? They're potentially believers, but they're either afraid to say that because they work in a publicly atheistic community, and they maybe have never heard the gospel per se. They heard about Jesus, but when they're studying this complexity of just of a human cell, not to even go further, they're like, this is impossible to have just begin by itself. It's impossible. It's such a complex mini factory. It just made itself or just evolved. I mean, how much is this a big of an argument that would not necessarily lead to Christ, but to monotheistic religions when it comes to the structure of DNA?
Well, and we've talked about this before. I think before the show, the path that Flew follows through his lifetime is really kind of a foil for the way that the knowledge of mankind in these realms, talking about these specific topics, has increased and decidedly moved towards God and creation. But also the way that we have been able as apologists to present these arguments, we have gotten a lot more knowledgeable and a lot better at presenting the arguments. And I think Flew, in determining to follow the evidence, followed in the beginning what arguments there were that in you're looking at the 20th century, the early 20th century. You talk about the Scopes trial and things like that. Darwin and his stuff was in the 1800s. You're moving towards an environment where science is kind of the god of a lot of people, and if you don't worship that god, then you're going to be ostracized. You're going to be rejected if you are trying to work in the science field. It's like trying to be somebody who is a Muslim coming in and trying to work in a Christian organization, but remaining a Muslim, right? That's not going to work, or vice versa. If I was a Christian heading over into a Muslim country and trying to work in a Muslim religious organization, but trying to say, I'm not a Muslim, but I'm going to work with you guys, that's really hard to do. But as time is progressing and our knowledge is progressing and our arguments are progressing, I think a lot of people in the 20th century who were afraid, and who probably in a lot of cases did lose money or jobs or whatever because they expressed their faith in God, I think that has been weakening and isn't as much of a case anymore. I think you're seeing a huge shift now in the 21st century away from this god of science that's really a fake god, because it's not really science that they're promoting, but a dogmatic belief system that isn't based in reality. And it's being exposed over and over again. And I think Flew saw that through the arguments related to DNA and where life came from. You have, if you understand anything about uh, proteins and amino acids and the way that they form, they all have to be left-handed. And what are the odds of them linking up in the environment that the evolutionists say existed way back when abiogenesis was happening, and why isn't it happening today? All of these different arguments are showing such great complexity, and the likelihood of it happening by random chance is so infinitesimally small, is it's a joke. It's laughable. And so you can bring those things up and stand firm now. And Flew, who is following evidence, is able to see that and cut through all of the, I think he probably for the most part ignored all of the people calling him names and acting like fools when he suddenly wasn't their hero anymore. I think he's like, well, I don't care. You're not arguing. You're not bringing evidence. You're just mouthing. I follow evidence, and you aren't bringing anything for me to examine. And so he's following that evidence. And I think that's where it led him. So I don't want to get into the specifics of those arguments because again I could be here for hours. But I think that's what we see reflected is Flew is that foil transforming over the course of his lifetime the way that the arguments in favor of creationism and God have transformed.
Yeah, thank you for that. I found this fascinating when Antony Flew admits that he was impressed with Gary Schroeder's point-by-point refutation of which I call the monkey theorem. This idea, which has been presented in a number of forms and variations, defends the possibility of life arising by chance using the analogy of a multitude of monkeys banging away on computer keyboards and eventually ending up writing a Shakespearean sonnet. Now, this is very cool and funny. Schroeder first referred to an experiment conducted by the British National Council of Arts. A computer was placed in a cage with 6 monkeys. After 1 month of hammering away at it, as well as using it as a bathroom, hilarious, the monkeys produced 50 type pages, but not a single word. Schroeder noted that this was the case even though the shortest word in the English language is one letter, such as A or I. A is a word only if there is a space on either side of it. If we take it that the keyboard has 30 characters, the 36 letters and other symbols, and then the likelihood of getting a one-letter word is 30 times 30 times 30, which is 27,000. The likelihood of getting a one-letter word is 1 chance out of 27,000. Schroeder then applied the probabilities to the sonnet analogy. He asked the famous question, what's the chance of getting a Shakespearean sonnet? Then he analyzed so many things and gave numbers that I don't have time to read, but basically he's saying that if you took the entire universe and converted it to computer chips, forget the monkeys, each one weighing a millionth of a gram, and had each computer chip able to spin out 488 trials at, say, a million times a second. If you turn the entire universe into these microcomputer chips, and these chips were spinning a million times a second, producing random letters, the number of trials you would get since the beginning of time would be 10 to the 90th trials. It would be off again by a factor of 10 to the 600th. You will never get a sonnet by chance. The universe would have to be 10 to the 600th times larger, yet the world just thinks the monkeys can do it every time. It was so profound and so funny. So if we think that monkeys, by just random typing, cannot even form one word, yet we think the universe just happened to be out of nothing, which, again, they're just proving mathematically they're not even using philosophy or theology. At least Dr. Schroeder, he's like, if a monkey cannot make one word, but yet you want to make it like they can write a whole sonnet, then do you think just the universe can explode and create life out of nothing, and DNA structure, which I forgot how many billions of letters are included in DNA? They're saying like that's insane. Yet you will believe that everything came out of nothing with no causal effects, divine agent that we call God, but you actually believe that monkeys can create sonnet. So this was to me so profound and hilarious. Any comment on that?
Yeah, so first of all, for the atheist, time is magic. Given enough time, anything can happen, right? So if I don't have enough time, if your argument shows that you don't have enough time, well, just give me more time. And again, Warren hit Flew with this. And he said, I'll give you all the time you need. You can have as many billions of years as you want. You've only got 5 minutes before the human brain runs out of oxygen. And so you have to have somehow a way to evolve the lungs to produce oxygen for the brain and whatever. So that was an argument that he made. But when you look at science, when you understand probabilities in science, there's a limit to what is possible and then what is purely hypothetical, and that is to the power of 50. Anything that is a 1 in 1 times 10 to the 50th power, anything beyond that is scientifically impossible. It is not going to happen. We can talk about hypothetical and we can get big numbers. I mean, we came up with the square root of -1. It's an imaginary number, right? Doesn't really exist. You can't go anywhere in the universe and find the square root of -1. Just the same way, when you get beyond the number of hydrogen atoms that are in the universe, and that's a pretty big number in terms of the exponent, you've moved well beyond what is possible. And so that's what they do, is they've moved completely away from what is real science, which is that which is observable, that which is repeatable, that which is we can draw conclusions from the things that we observe and whatnot, to the purely magical. It is, and I write fantasy. I am intimately familiar with magic and what is fantasy and what is pure imagination, and that's all they have. Because everything, when you get into atheism and evolution and is all it is. There isn't anything in it that it smacks of truth. And anytime they dip into the well of what is actually true, they're borrowing from God. They're borrowing from Christianity, based on what God has already made the universe to be like. So if you talk about the laws, well, where do the laws come from? Why does the universe have laws? Flew talks about that in his book. Where do the laws come from? And you have to borrow from God if you're going to start talking about anything related to objective truth. And that's what the atheists do. Otherwise, it's pure fantasy, it's pure speculation, it's magic, the magic of time, the magic of quantum fluctuations in the nothing, and whatever else they want to make up.
Okay, thank you. One more thing when it comes to chapter 3. Here, Professor Flew goes after Richard Dawkins and his book, The Selfish Gene, which was very popular back in the days. And this is what Antony Flew says in response. He says, genes, of course, can neither be selfish nor unselfish any more than they or any other non-conscious entities can engage in competition or make selections. Natural selection is notoriously not selection, and it is a somewhat less familiar logical fact that below the human level, the struggle for existence is not competitive in the true sense of the word. But this did not stop Dawkins from proclaiming that his book is not science fiction, it is science. We are survival machines, robot vehicles blindly programmed to preserve the selfish molecules known as genes. And obviously, Flew disagreed with him. As a man of science, what would you say to someone like Richard Dawkins and his book, The Selfish Gene? And again, just within a couple of minutes.
Yeah, so I would agree with what Flew showed, and the things that Flew had to deal with was the reality of evil. If Dawkins is going to argue that everything is deterministic, which is what The Selfish Gene does argue, then there is no such thing as evil, and he can't make that argument at all in retaliation to God. He can't say, well, evil exists. How could a God who's all-loving God allow for evil to exist? I'm sorry, but you can't make an argument that evil exists at all if determinism is true. There's no such thing as evil, especially if you're talking about it without reference to God at all. And that's how I would respond to him. I would just turn it back on him again, like I said before. So.
Okay, thank you. Now we're switching to chapter 4, which he titled A Pilgrimage of Reason. And I'll just read a couple of quotations. He says that, I now believe that the universe was brought into existence by an infinite intelligence. I believe that this universe's intricate laws manifest what scientists have called the mind of God. I believe that life and reproduction originate in a divine source with capital S. Why do I believe this, given that I expounded and defended atheism for more than half a century? The short answer is this. This is the world picture, as I see it, that has emerged from modern science. Science spotlights 3 dimensions of nature that point to God. The first one is the fact that nature obeys laws. The second is the dimension of life, or intelligently organized and purpose-driven beings which arose from matter. The third is the very existence of nature, Do you think these are like self-explanatory? Would you like to briefly comment on these three facts that he stated about the science?
Well, I think people who especially would be watching your video are going to be familiar enough with the arguments that they're going to understand what Flew is saying here. But what he's going back to is those boxes, those 7 boxes that Warren put him in, and
Mm,
said you can't get to what you need to get to until you get through all 7 of these. And now Flew is acknowledging, yeah, you're right. We have life, we have intelligence, we have conscience, we have matter could not have always been here. And he's acknowledging the reality of those things and following that evidence and coming to the conclusion, yeah, there's no other explanation but an eternal mind.
okay, thank you. He also says something again about number three. Three domains of scientific inquiry have been especially important for me, and I will consider them as we proceed in the light of today's evidence. The first is the question that puzzled and continues to puzzle most reflective scientists, namely, how did the laws of nature come to be? Second, and this should be evident to all, how did life as phenomenon originate from non-life? And the third is the problem that philosophers handed over to cosmologists. How did the universe by which we mean, I'm sorry, how did the universe by which we mean all that is physical come into existence? So again, if we're talking about these three biggest scientific inquiries, questions that again are related to how did the laws of nature came to be, then how did life originate from non-life, supposedly, and the third one, how did the universe come into existence? Ernie, am I wrong, or not many secular scientists are bothered to even study and try to answer these questions? To some of these scientists, this will be even ridiculous to ask because these are the questions that cannot be understood, that cannot be studied and given well, maybe well an answer that is that has solid evidence. So for them they'll be rather focusing on, like we said, on something that is created instead of a creator. So am I wrong, or they're focusing on something that is less important than on the major importance, or they're maybe trying to focus, maybe even be intellectually lazy by saying, well, this is the question for philosophers and theologians. Let's leave these big questions to them and we'll be just focusing on science. I can say fair enough, but aren't you, as someone who is studying, a man of science, and science just means knowledge, don't you owe to yourself? You don't even have to publish this type of academic articles if you think you'll be ridiculed by your coworkers. But I'm just confused how come more scientists are not open-minded and curious to research beyond the matter and time and physics, and try to go to the very beginning of all, to the big banger, the unmoved mover, the uncaused cause. What is preventing so many people to try to, they may not come up with solid answers, but what is preventing them not to even try to study these three big questions in science?
Well, again, I'll bring it back to the idea. It's fear and selfishness. I don't. I'm not sure which one it was. Was it Huxley or one of those guys that said, "I refuse to believe in God because I'd have to give up my sex life." That's the mentality of a lot of them. But a lot of them also is just fear. Is I know if I acknowledge this, then the consequences of acknowledging that there is a lawgiver, then I have to follow those laws. I have to behave in the way that he has directed. And I have to give up things, and I don't want to give up things. So that you have that selfishness and that fear are part of it. And then when you deal with those three specific things, I think what you're dealing with are questions that are unanswerable by them. That's where you get into all of the fantasy that I talked about. But Flew took them head on and did the very thing that they're afraid that they would have to do, which is he changed his mind when he took those three things head on, and he understood, okay, the laws had to have come from somewhere, and they can't come from nothing, and life had to come from somewhere, and there's no way it could come about by a random chemical chance and all of that. And then the idea of the universe and all of its matter, energy, time, and space had to come from something that couldn't come from nothing. He followed the evidence, and his result is the same thing that everyone else has to face. And that's why they won't give those answers. They'll scoff. They'll say, well, that's, like I said before, they'll redirect you. They'll say, well, this is a question of biology. Abiogenesis is chemistry, or that's cosmology, that's physics, and I'm a biologist. I'm talking about the fact of evolution, and they'll assert that evolution is a fact and whatnot, and they'll avoid it. They'll avoid it like the plague, and they will do everything that they can, say whatever they can say, ultimately to the point of scoffing at you and bullying you, and then just throwing up their hands and saying, "I'm done with this conversation." Because if they have to deal with those things head on, face first, then they're going to either do what Flew did and change their mind, which they're afraid of, or their conscience is going to be so seared that they're going to just fall into a life of, I think, misery and angry. You see these guys that are just the hardcore atheist trolls, and how miserable they are as they come after us, because they have nothing else. They have to attack us. They have to say, well, you guys don't have any arguments. They have to come after us because their conscience won't let them allow us to win. And we're not trying to win an argument. We're trying to win souls to Christ. That is my ultimate goal whenever I get into any of these discussions, is I'm trying to teach people about Jesus and get them to obey the gospel and to have that relationship with God. And if that means I've got to talk about the universe and answer all of these questions you have over here about how the universe came to be in life and all of that, I'm going to make you face some hard truths, but that's where you're at. So I've got to meet you where you're at. And that's my ultimate goal, is to save your soul and get you to heaven.
Amen. Amen. Now, this is very interesting. Flew said that the God whose existence is defended by David Conway and myself is the God of Aristotle. Conway wrote the following: in sum, to the being with capital B, whom he considered to be the explanation of the world and its broad form, Aristotle ascribed the following attributes: immutability, immateriality, omnipotence, omniscience, oneness, perfect goodness, and necessary existence, these 7 attributes. There is an impressive correspondence between this set of attributes and those traditionally ascribed to God within the Judeo-Christian tradition. It is one that fully justifies us in viewing Aristotle as having had the same divine being in mind as the cause of the world that is object of worship of these 2 religions. Now, I have a twofold question. That would be, first, how would you respond, Ernie, to those who will be like Tertullian saying, hey, what has Jerusalem has to do with Athens? Meaning Jerusalem is faith-based and Athens is all logic, reason, and philosophy. Because I asked this question, my former philosophy professor back at Moody Bible Institute, he never found philosophy to be a problem of Christianity or of our faith. But the second thing is, how was Flew or Conway able to see and believe this entity with these 7 divine characteristics and see the similarity in Christianity, yet not to make the decision like to convert and start following Christ? What would be the stumbling block? It wasn't fear, it wasn't reason. I know it's faith, I know, but I think that can be a simplistic answer. But he already saw so many similarities between this so-called God of Aristotle and Christian God. When I again spoke with my former professor back at school, I remember him saying that it could be that God, revealed himself to Plato, to Aristotle. And again, we can go back to Romans 1. Because even now in our systematic theology, we use a lot of Greek philosophy, and I don't think it's bad. So again, 2 questions. How would we respond to those people who say, hey, leave us with philosophy, leave us with Athens. We don't want to deal with worldly philosophies and human intelligence and whatever. And on the second thing, how can someone believe in an entity with so many divine properties yet reject God or the Bible? Oh, you're muted. Yeah.
And then It took a second to come off of mute. So
Mhm.
I'm reminded. I believe it was in Ephesians. I could be wrong about that. Actually, let me pull it up. No, it's Second John. That we talk about in truth and love. Okay, when we preach the gospel, we preach the gospel in truth and love. If you just have truth, then you have Athens. And the Jews in Jerusalem really loved God. They had a great zeal for God, Paul talks about in Romans 10, but it was not according to knowledge. And I think that's the divide that you see there, is that when you try to separate out those two things, then you are only seeing a part of the picture. And that's where I think you have somebody like Flew and some of these other guys who aren't taking that final step, is they see the truth. They look at the truth of the universe and reality and the evidence, and they come to certain conclusions, including that God exists, but they haven't taken that step into understanding God's love, which would be the Bible, which would be Christ, which would be His communicating with us. Right? If God exists, if there's a creator of the universe, did He communicate to His creation? That's the next big question you ask. And I don't know that Flew ever got to that point where he was ready to take that step and say, okay, well, maybe the Bible, he hints at it. He talks about it. He says that, Christianity has probably the best system in terms of relating to this God, but he wasn't a Christian. He hadn't taken that step. What does Paul say in Romans 1:16? The gospel is the power of God unto salvation. And so those who are like Flew and others, they haven't accepted the gospel. They haven't accepted who Jesus really was. They may acknowledge his historicity, that he was a historical person, that he was a real person. Maybe he was a good teacher. But, as we talk about, if Jesus was a real person and he taught the things that he taught, he was either a liar, a madman, or he was God when he was walking among us. And those are the three possibilities. He can't just be a good teacher, because if he was a good teacher, then the things that he taught were true, and that makes him God. He claimed over and over and over again to be deity. And so he is God, he is man. And when they come into the face to face with that reality, and the reality of the truth that the Bible is God communicating to us and its flawlessness, that's the step they needed to take, and that's where they encounter the love of God, I think.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, switching to chapter 5, who wrote the laws of nature? Perhaps the most popular and intuitively plausible argument for God's existence is the so-called argument from design. And by the way, I love this argument. Also, I love cosmological. According to this argument, the design that is apparent in nature suggests the existence of a cosmic designer. Developments in two areas in particular have led me to this conclusion. The first is the question of the origin of the laws of nature and the related insights of eminent modern scientists. The second is the question of the origin of life and reproduction. But what do I mean by the laws of nature? By law, I simply mean irregularity or symmetry in nature. The important point is not merely that there are regularities in nature, but that these regularities are mathematically precise, universal, and tied together. He put this in quotations. Einstein spoke of them as reason incarnate. I love this. This is certainly the question that scientists from Newton to Einstein to Heisenberg have asked and answered. Their answer was the mind of God. Ernie, I love this. I mean, on one side, yeah, they're not calling Yahweh, they're not saying God of the Bible, but when they speak of mind of God with capital M and with capital G, I mean, this is not too much different from, some of the Greek philosophy, and not too much different from the Bible. We can use different language, just like, for example, Jordan Peterson. I don't even know if he's Christian, but I'm going beyond that. He can use some other terminology when he's trying to describe God. How good, I'm not going to judge it now, but I'm just saying when we use science, when we use reason, when we use intellect, when we use philosophy, when we use science, and we see all of these evidences, all of these clues pointing to this mind of God, and we're trying to show this again, putting Bible on a side because these are men of science, men of philosophy, men of reason. Then and then he's talking now about the laws of nature. They're tied together, and they're quoting Einstein again. What is besides pride, besides sin, besides fear, what is preventing people out there in atheistic science, atheistic community, to say, listen, we don't believe in God's existence, certainly not in God of the Bible, because they will call God of the Bible with different names, such as he would be, a proponent of slavery, he would supposedly hate women, he would be a narcissist, he would be a tyrant, all this nonsense, right? But what would prevent them to see the clues and say, okay, let us think about this. Let us dialogue among each other. Let us try to see the evidence, and we'll get back to you about this mind of God. There's the Tertullian and also a scientific version that also Einstein promoted and supported. So again, like, I don't know if sometimes could be also that stubbornness and be that goes beyond blindness, saying like, no, I will hold to my position no matter what. And us as Christians, we can also hold to some of our religious beliefs stubbornly, even though we may be wrong. It can be a belief in anything, any doctrinal position, doesn't matter how big or of secondary or tertiary importance it is. How much does humility play a role in accepting evidence?
Well, so first of all, let me say that I think we need to be careful when we try to bring together Greek philosophy and the Roman ideologies and the pagan thoughts with Christianity. I think when you do that, you end up getting into the same problems that Augustine had. That I think I would argue very vehemently corrupted the church of his day and gave us Catholicism. That the ideas that he proposed come from his time, where he was studying Plato and he was studying Aristotle and he was studying those kinds of things. So when you put those things together, you're kind of diluting the message. And so I personally don't really spend a lot of time talking about the Greeks and their philosophies. And I would argue that those labels that the atheists bring are because many of them have studied Greek mythology. Many of them have studied those philosophers and whatever. And so they have a skewed vision of God, and they bring those labels because the thing that they have learned about God doesn't come directly from the Bible. A lot of them have learned from their preachers, just like when you talk about the people who have learned a wrong theology. Something, you were talking about the differences that we have in our theological beliefs, so that we can hold on to something when it's wrong, but we still hold on to it because my dear old grandmother believed it, or my preacher has taught that for 30 years or whatever. The atheists have their preachers too, and they have their heroes of the faith. And when they hear those, like if you can tell when you get on to like X or something like that, and there's a discussion going on and you hear the same old tired arguments, you can tell this person hasn't actually read the Bible. What they did is they did an internet search to find the next thing that they can argue from the Bible says this little memory verse snippet here, and therefore God, I know everything there is to know about God, and that's why I reject his existence. That's the way they've learned it. And I think that their understanding of who God is and what he is an amalgamation of all of that on purpose, so that they can hold on to their selfish desires. That's what, again, Paul talks about in Romans chapter 1. God gives them over to that reprobate mind, to those desires that they have, those inordinate desires, what the Jews called Yetzer Hara. We have our Yetzer Hatov, which is the desires that are natural, that are God designed in us, the desire for procreation, the desire for food and shelter and those kinds of things. But when they become inordinate desires, as James talks about, then that leads to sin. And I think that's what they're doing, is they're selfishly holding on to those, and they're using that kind of eclectic base of knowledge as a kind of a buffer, so that they don't actually have to go read the Bible and understand the Bible for what it is. Because if they actually read through the Bible and understood it, many more of them, not all of them, but many more of them would they would be faced with conversion, like what Flew did. I know Isaac Asimov read through the Bible. He wrote a commentary on it. So I know that not everybody's going to change, but I can say with very great certainty that most of the keyboard warriors that I see on X or on social media, they haven't read it through. There's no way they've read it through.
Yeah, thank you for that. I want to switch shortly to Einstein. I'm going to skip a big chunk of our notes for the sake of time. When he was asked about Spinoza and Spinoza's influence on Einstein and Spinoza's pantheism, this is what Einstein replied. He said, "I'm not an atheist, and I don't think I can call myself a pantheist. We're in the position of a little child entering a huge library filled with books in many languages. The child knows someone must have written those books. It does not know how. It does not understand the languages in which they are written. The child dimly suspects a mysterious order in the arrangements of the books, but doesn't know what it is. That, it seems to me, is the attitude of even the most intelligent human being towards God. We see the universe marvelously arranged in obeying certain laws, but only dimly understand these laws. Our limited minds grasp the mysterious force that moves the constellations." I love that quotation by Einstein. So Einstein agreed with Spinoza that he who knows nature knows God, but not because nature is God. And I would say, thank God that he didn't believe that, but because the pursuit of science in studying nature leads to religion. Einstein clearly believed in a transcendent source of the rationality of the world that he variously called superior mind, or um, illimitable superior spirit, or superior reasoning force, or mysterious force that moves the constellations. So again, he had so many synonyms for God, at least for the biblical God. And I just have to say, um, these findings that I didn't know, for example, about Einstein, and the way he found these synonyms about that he used these synonyms about God. This is not so much well known in the internet community out there. And when I was reading this, I was so excited, especially how he gave this parallel of a child entering a library. And then when he comes with these synonyms of God, I'm like, yeah, this will be interesting, and I think even important to remember and maybe write down these synonyms like superior mind, superior reasoning force, and such when we are conversing with our atheist friends, so that we can use these things. What would be your opinion of both these synonyms and of his, um, parable, if I can use that word, that a child entering a library and seeing all these books, like, yeah, you must see the order, you must see the meaning of these words, you must see that someone printed these and put them together, you must see that someone climbed and arranged them, you must see that all this color, all these letters, all this structure, it's pointing to someone who pays attention, who is orderly, who cares, who is personal. It is not just like Tornado just went through this library and put all these books together in order and just left and disappeared, because Tornado would cause chaos. So again, what is your comment on this section when it comes to Einstein?
A tornado or a room full of monkeys, right? Uh, so the first thing I would say is, in regard to Einstein the person, I think he was a very wise man in that he knew how much he didn't know, and he recognized that. And I think that's the beginning of wisdom, is to realize you don't know everything, and you probably don't know a lot of things. And for those of us who do deal in intellectual topics, I've dealt with physics my entire life and theology and those things. It is difficult to stay humble. It's difficult to say, somebody could be saying something that I've not heard before, or saying it in a way that I've never heard before, and they could be right and I could be wrong. And allowing yourself to say that person has a point. And as I've gotten older, I've tried to be more like that. Um, and I think that's helped me grow in my own faith. Um, I've been a member of the same faith my entire life. But I think I've grown in that faith because I've come into contact with those who believe different things. And I think Einstein as the person was as brilliant as he was, as wise as he was. That was one of the big things that I think we need to recognize, is the wisdom that he had was in, I don't know everything. And I don't know that there's too much that Einstein has to say about the biblical God, because I don't know how much interaction Einstein had with the Bible. Now, Einstein, the icon, is a different thing. And I think this is a worthy conversation to have, especially in the scientific community and even in the theological community. A lot of people have put Einstein up on a pedestal. It's like the guy could do no wrong. And so everybody, when you think of intelligence, you think the name Einstein. This who was Albert Einstein? Well, he is intelligence. He is the incarnation of intelligence, and everybody puts him up there. And so when you have people who are atheistic and whatever, and they want to appeal to intellect and to science, well, of course, everybody thinks Albert Einstein. And so, of course, they're going to have to downplay the things that he did say about believing in God. And they're going to try to spin it, and they're going to take this quote over here out of context, and they're going to try to put it in such a way that, hey, he didn't believe in the Christian God, and he didn't believe in God the way you think he did. Whereas on the other side of that, you're going to have a lot of people on the side that believe in the Judeo-Christian God, the God of the Bible, who also try to use Einstein to support the belief in the biblical God. And Einstein didn't necessarily believe in the biblical God. He believed in a personal, individual God, a mind that was that had a personality, that was an individual being. But to say that he to some extent believed in Yahweh, that he believed in the God of the Bible, is taking it too far the other way. And so lifting Einstein up as any kind of a standard, I think, is a mistake that a lot of people make on both sides. I personally, I think I would have really liked to know him. I think I would have gotten along with him, and I would have had many, many, many really, really long and probably very boring conversations for other people to listen to. But for us, I think it would have been fantastic. But I personally don't ever want to lift him up as if he's a standard for anything. In fact, there are a couple of his theories that I disagree with, and I'm not going to get into those tonight.
Yeah, thank you for that. I just want to say that I made a mistake. I don't know why I said what I called that story that Einstein mentioned a metaphor. Of course, that was stupid what I said. I didn't think before I was speaking, which means I broke one of the. Yes. So, but I said metaphor, which I was just speaking without thinking, which says opposite than what James is calling us to do. So I just broke one of the commandments. Oh well.
Well, I don't think there's a problem in calling it a parable, or a fable, or an analogy, or any of those kinds of things. There's no harm in that. A parable is just.
No, I said it was a metaphor.
So it is a metaphor. I think that's correct. That it's a way to try to understand our understanding of the universe and the way that God has richly kind of imprinted himself. Like he signed every atom, he signed every cell. You have all of these pointers to God all over the place, and it's just layer upon layer. And the more we come to know, the more we realize what we don't know. And I think that's what Einstein was getting at with, and I think it's an apt metaphor. I think it's an apt analogy or a parable for us to look at the universe that way, and to be humble the way that Einstein was humble and say, yeah, there's a whole lot I just don't know.
Well, thank you for defending me. I have one more quotation. It's a short one from the same chapter, chapter 5, and then we'll switch to the next one. It's about Charles Darwin, who said something similarly. He said, "Reason tells me of the extreme difficulty, or rather impossibility, of conceiving this immense and wonderful universe, including man, with his capability of looking far backwards and far into futurity, as the result of blind chances or necessity. When thus reflecting, I feel compelled to look to a first cause with capital F and capital C, having an intelligent mind in some degree analogous to that of man. I deserve to be called a theist." I, Ernie, how many atheists out there, but also Christians, do not even know that Charles Darwin was not anti-theist and he was not even an atheist? He believed in God, but whatever led him to conclude and to believe and write, when it comes to the theory of evolution, I'm not even going into its into the whole theory and trying to promote it or defend it or deny it. I'm just saying that how important is for the whole society out there who like debating online, both on the Christian side and on the atheistic side, to know that, hey, Charles Darwin believed in God. He was not an unbeliever. So just because he wrote a theory of evolution does not make him that he believes that this evolution would be happening outside of God's influence as a divine agent who would start it. That doesn't mean I believe in evolution, but to many people, evolution would disprove the existence of God, or even our scriptures. We're trying here to say that, hey, Darwin, that was not Darwin's goal. That was not on Darwin's heart. He fully believed in the Bible, but this was his scientific understanding and approaching of the existence of man. So I was just thinking that we have, over the years, including Christian culture, many times anathematized Darwin by calling him names, putting him in the categories where may he not belong. While he was the whole time believer, now where he ended, how firm was he faith? I'm not even going there. I'm just saying that he was not, just like Einstein was not a non-believer. Darwin was not also a non-believer. So I don't know if there's any message to the Christian or atheistic community out there that will like tell them and just affirm that Darwin was not trying to go against God or the Bible.
Well, so again, I would give the same caution that I gave with Einstein. Yes, if you are going to be talking to an atheist and an atheist is really, really harping on the ties between evolution and atheism, and they are really lifting Darwin up as somebody on a pedestal, as an idol or whatever, then knowing that he didn't reject belief in God to some extent, that he had some kind of belief in God, is important to maybe bring down their faulty arguing. Like just shooting down an idol and saying, look, you're making these claims about Darwin that just aren't true. And we need to get back on track and talking about the evidence. But again, we don't need to swing so far in apologetics that we're trying to lift Darwin up as our own kind of idol or pedestal or something to point to. The man was a racist. The man was if you go back and you look at the original title of The Origin of Species, it's talking about the preferred races and whatever. He was absolutely and the things that he has brought into the world have led to a lot of evils. So he's by no means somebody that we should lift up as anything as a good thing, but to also know that he didn't fully reject God is a useful bit of information, because the atheists lift him up so much. And that's just kind of a general caution that I would give to anybody about anybody. Don't lift humans up as who you follow or as somebody who is the standard for your beliefs. The person that you should be looking to for your standard of belief is Jesus Christ, and only him.
Amen.
So
Yeah, we all fail, and we've been witnessing for the last several years so many Christian clergy and so many Christian musicians and artists failing big, sexually, financially, in so many areas that make you, well, just reminds you that we're all fallible human beings, and we, like you said, you should not put on a pedestal any human being, because even people who send me compliments about a podcast or myself, I try to tell them, listen, I'm not who you think you are. I know my motives. God knows them. I'm not that bad. I'm not that great either. So like, don't try to like put me on some level because of whatever you may see about me or think about me. You know, that's not the whole picture. I didn't plan on asking you, Ernie, this, but since we mentioned evolution and Darwin, is it true that his book was one of the things that influenced a Nazi regime?
oh yeah. When you look through the artifacts that they found, and you look through the leadership in Adolf's close circle and stuff, you find Darwin's book there. There's a number of books that people don't want associated with Nazism that were there, that these people were reading, and the idea of the Aryan race being the superior race, that feeds right off of evolution and what Darwin was trying to promote with his idea of evolution. He wasn't trying to give us a cosmological origin story. He was trying to give us why white people are better than everybody else. That's what he was doing. That was his goal. And so he had a conclusion, and he was trying to find supporting evidence for the conclusion. And so I would never lift Darwin up as anything. And I this kind of goes back just in a more general way. When I am discussing things online, I see this a lot. A lot of people do this in terms of lifting somebody up. Is when I'm discussing theology, they will quote people at me, like commentaries or their big names in something, this or that big name. And they find it frustrating that I only will talk about the Bible, that I'll only ever quote the Bible, that I will never, ever refer to a commentary. The only commentary they ever get a link to are the ones that I wrote, because I'm the one in the conversation, and it's just easier for me to link them to that because it has the whole argument. But I don't ever appeal to another non-inspired person, because that person is not the standard of truth. Jesus Christ is the standard of truth. The Bible is the standard of truth. If you are making appeals to somebody other than the Word of God, that person can make mistakes. Like William Lane Craig, he's done some really cool stuff. I disagree with a lot of the things that he believes. Einstein did some really, really cool things. I disagree with a lot of the things that he believed. And so the only place that I can go and know that I'm not going to disagree with, and if I find myself believing something different than what is being written there, I'm going to change. And that's the Bible. And so that's the only source of objective truth that we really, really have when we're making these arguments. And so anybody coming to an argument bringing somebody else in, it's always going to end up bad. It's always going to fail at some point, because those people are not the standard of truth.
Okay, thank you. We're switching to chapter 6. Did the universe know we were coming? The more I examine the universe and study the details of its architecture, writes physicist Freeman Dyson, the more evidence I find that the universe, in some sense, knew we were coming. I love this statement. In other words, the laws of nature seem to have been crafted so as to move the universe toward the emergence and sustenance of life. Let's take the most basic laws of physics. It has been calculated that the value of even one of the fundamental constants, the speed of light or the mass of an electron, for instance, had been to the slightest degree different, then no planet capable of permitting the evolution of human life could have formed. This fine-tuning has been explained in two ways. Some scientists have said that the fine-tuning is evidence for divine design. Many others have speculated that our universe is one of multiple others, a multiverse, with the difference that ours happen to have the right conditions for life. Virtually no major scientist today claims that the fine-tuning was purely a result of chance factors at work in a single universe. Both Paul Davies and Richard Swinburne reject the multiverse idea. Davies, a physicist and cosmologist, writes that it is trivially true that in an infinite universe, anything that can happen will happen. But this is not an explanation at all. If we are trying to understand why the universe is biofriendly, we're not helped by being told that all possible universes exist. Like a blunderbuss, it explains everything and nothing. Swinburne is strong in his disdain for the multiverse explanation. He says that it is crazy to postulate a trillion universes to explain the features of one universe when postulating one entity, which is God. When postulating that one entity, who is God, will do the job. Three things might be said concerning the arguments about fine tuning. First, it is a hard fact that we live in a universe with certain laws and constants. And life would not have been possible if some of these laws and constants had been different. Two, the fact that the existing laws and constants allow the survival of life does not answer the question of the origin of life. This is a very different question, as I will try to show. These conditions are necessary for life to arise, but are not sufficient. And third, the fact that it is logically possible that there are multiple universes with their own laws of nature does not show that such universes do exist. There is currently no evidence in support of a multiverse. It remains a speculative idea. What is especially important here is the fact that the existence of a multiverse does not explain the origin of the laws of nature. Okay, Ernie, I know it was a lengthy text, but when it comes to either the divine design that would, enable human flourishing, so in a way the universe knew it was coming because God was preparing everything for us, and in the second part of this chapter that deals with multiverse hypothesis, what is your answer to these two parts of the chapter?
Well, so my response is going to be the same as it was before. It's just magic. You're just coming up with a fantasy explanation for the thing that you don't want to deal with. I think you have the right of it when looking at. You said it was a Dyson that said that it's easier to say that and more simple to say that there was a creator mind that did it than to postulate these trillions of universes. I'm reminded of the interview that Ben Stein did with Richard Dawkins, where Ben Stein eventually cornered him and got him to say, "Well, aliens did it." Well, what's the difference between your aliens, Richard Dawkins, and God? It's just an absurd thing. And when you do look at the universe, I think Lee Strobel said in A Case for Christ that there were so many things that had to line up for human existence to be true in the universe. Like if there were so many things, and I don't think he came up with it. I think he was just quoting somebody else, but that's where I remember it from. If the gravitational force was just off by a little bit, if the electromagnetic force was off by just a tiny little bit, if the Earth was slightly closer or slightly farther from the sun, like all of these things, there's thousands of things that had to be true, like the position of the Earth in between the galactic arms and the relative deadness of space. We don't have much stellar activity. We've got four gas giants that protect us from asteroids and other things coming in. They're gravity wells that protect us from anything that would catastrophically end the Earth. You have all of these things. One or two of them, sure, we can explain that by happenstance. But when you have thousands of them, no way. That's by design. There's only that explanation is left is that it was by design. And I think that if you and I could go into the physics of why a multiverse can't be an explanation, that it can't have anything to do with our universe, even if they do exist, which there's no evidence that they do. But when you reach for something like that, that's what you're doing, is you're reaching in the same way that they reach for their answers about abiogenesis, and they reach for their answers with the fluctuations in the quantum nothing and all of that kind of stuff. It's magic. It's fantasy because they don't want to deal with the reality that God exists and he demands things of us.
Okay, thank you for that. Switching to chapter 7, which is well, yeah, we have 2 chapters left, and then we'll be done with the episode. Um, Chapter 7 was titled "How Did Life Go Live?" I was quoted as saying that biologists' investigation of DNA has shown, by the almost unbelievable complexity of the arrangements needed to produce life, that intelligence must have been involved. These statements provoked an outcry from critics who claimed that I was not familiar with the latest work in abiogenesis. Sorry for if I butchered the word. Richard Dawkins claimed that I was appealing to a god of the gaps. The philosophical question was not that has not been answered in this origin of life studies is following: how can a universe of mindless matter produce beings with intrinsic ends, self-replication capabilities, and coded chemistry? Here, we are not dealing with biology, but an entirely different category of problem. So I know that I wrote lengthy notes, Ernie, so I'm going to skip here until, let's say, I don't know, 10D. When it comes to David Conway, he summarizes some of the philosophical quandaries in responding to David Hume. The first challenge is to produce a materialistic explanation for the very first emergence of living matter from non-living matter. The second challenge is to produce an equally materialist explanation for the emergence from the very earliest life forms, which were incapable of reproducing themselves, of life forms with a capacity for reproducing themselves. Without the existence of such a capacity, it would not have been possible for different species to emerge through random mutations and natural selection. A third philosophical dimension to the origin of life relates to the origin of the coding and information processing that is central to all life forms. The genetic message in DNA is duplicated in replication and then copied from DNA to RNA in transcription. Following this, there is translation whereby the message from RNA is conveyed to the amino acids, and finally the amino acids are assembled into proteins. The cell's two fundamentally different structures of information management and chemical activity are coordinated by the universal genetic code. The remarkable nature of this phenomenon becomes apparent when we highlight the word code. This is what David Berlinski writes. By itself, a code is familiar enough: an arbitrary mapping or a system of linkages between two discrete combinatorial objects. The Morse code, to take a familiar example, coordinates dashes and dots with letters of the alphabet. To note that codes are arbitrary is to know the distinction between a code and a purely physical connection between two objects. To note that codes embody mappings is to embed the concept of a code in mathematical language. To note that codes reflect a linkage of some sort is to return the concept of a code to its human uses. This in turn leads to the big question: can the origins of a system of coded chemistry be explained in a way that makes no appeal whatsoever to the kinds of facts that we otherwise invoke to explain codes and languages, systems of communication, the impress of ordinary words on the world of matter? Writing in the journal RNA, Carl Sweezy, I will assume that's his last name, a leader in origin of life studies, says the following: the coding rules, the dictionary of codon assignments, are known, yet they provide no clue as to why the code exists and why the mechanism of translation is what it is. He frankly admits that we do not know anything about the origin of such a system. The origin of translation, which is that is before it became a true decoding mechanism, are for now lost in the dimness of the past. And I don't wish to engage here in hand-waving speculations as to what polymerization processes might have preceded and given rise to it, or to speculate on the origins of tRNA charging systems, or the genetic code. I'll stop here because this is getting so much technical. I have to admit I don't understand everything, but you do. So I was just wondering if you can maybe summarize and explain this for the audience and myself when it comes to this chapter number 7. How did life go live?
Sure. So what you're looking at here, first of all, is Dawkins is kind of being, he's not intentionally being ironic, but he's being ironic when he says, well, you're just appealing to the God of the gaps, because this is exactly what he's doing. To get from a pool of chemicals to life is a huge gap. And they don't have anything to fill that gap. Abiogenesis is one of the big, I get you might ironically say the holy grail of evolution, is to be able to answer that question, is how do we get from chemicals to life? If they can answer that, then they gotcha. But the reality is, what is being laid out here in this argument is you're never going to be able to do that. You cannot get from chemicals to life naturalistically without a mind there to provide the codependent layers of code and purpose. The machine that reads the code to do the thing that it was meant to do is the biological level of things. That's the life, the things that perform living functions like reproduction, like the idea of having a blueprint and whatnot. And then the genetic code is the chemical level, where you have patterned systemic existence that has to be read so that purposes can be, like, if you're talking about what the purpose of a cell membrane is, or what the Golgi apparatus is, or what the nucleus is, or what does a lung do, what does a brain do, those kinds of things. Those are the biological level. They have purposes within the organism. And then when you get down to the chemical level, if it's just random chemical interaction with no purpose, you never have organism. And if you have organism and you don't have the chemical code so that it is patterned and systematic, then you don't have the purposes. The purposes might exist, but the organism can't exist because it can't function with. It's like a computer that has no code written in it, has no program installed in it. It just isn't going to function. It's dead. And so those two things have to work together. And if they aren't, if neither one of them is working, then you don't have life. And you can't have them arrive before each other, but evolution requires that one must arrive before the other. It's not a logical possibility that the code arrived before the mechanism and purpose arrived, and it's not logical and possible that the mechanism and purpose arrived before the code. But that's exactly what evolution needs to happen. And so it's a contradiction, and they're left with a gap that they can never cross.
Thank you so much for explaining this in the layman terms for people like me. I have one more quotation from this chapter, and then just a couple of quotations from the last chapter. So I think we'll be done in 10-15 minutes.
Cool.
So how do we account for the origin of life? The Nobel Prize-winning physiologist George Wald once famously argued that we choose to believe the impossible, that life arose spontaneously by chance. In later years, he concluded that a pre-existing mind, which he posits as the matrix of physical reality, composed a physical universe that breeds life. And this is his quotation. How is it that with so many other apparent options, we are in a universe that possesses just that peculiar nexus of properties that breeds life? It has occurred to me lately, I must confess with some shock at first to my scientific sensibilities, that both questions might be brought into some degree of congruence. This is with the assumption that mind, rather than emerging as a late outgrowth in the evolution of life, has existed always as the matrix, the source and condition of physical reality, that the stuff of which physical reality is constructed is mind stuff. It is mind that has composed a physical universe that breeds life, and so eventually evolves creatures that know and create, science, art, and technology making creatures. So again, I love how Antony Flew found all these people. They're not necessarily believers, not Christians for sure. Some of these are, but most of these people are not. They're simply doing their job. They're observing nature. They're observing science. They're spending time doing what they're what they're qualified for, and they're like, hey, wait, if they're intellectually honest, they're like, hey, wait, I found this, and what I've been taught in school, or maybe what my coworkers think, it's all random, or it's we don't have to worry about the very beginning. I actually differ, because if I see this and this perfectly matching each other, and without this wouldn't be possible, I have to ask myself, well, what will be the random chance that this and this would be just there in the perfect time, perfect space, waiting to work together, and that will later produce something else that would be beneficial for my life and existence. Well, don't I owe to myself to dig deeper into this and try to find the answer? Of course, I'm not this gentleman, but I'm just trying to be in his shoes, trying to ask big questions, as if, I'm just a scientist. I'm not, but I'm just like, what would happen if I would be in his shoes? Why wouldn't I ask these questions? And once when you ask the questions and try to find the answers, it takes a lot of guts, especially if you're coming from that type of community, to publicly speak about these things, because you will be mocked and some of your friends may turn back on you, which just shows they were never your true friends. But I love how, again, he found so many quotations, but people who are scientists and who just show outside the Bible, like, hey, check this, check DNA, check this, the basic human cell, check all these things, check the structure of the universe. It cannot be that it just came by itself. So I just wanted to just ask you if you have any comment on this gentleman, the Nobel Prize winning physiologist George Wald, because for me, I just love his statement.
Well, yeah, I think he is indicative of people who are following the evidence, like Flew did, that come to the conclusion, the universe is a big neon sign that basically says, God. It points to God. It isn't God, but it points to God. It says, here I am. You want to know me. There's a way to know me, but I exist. And I think that Wald and Flew and all of these other guys ultimately are being honest enough to follow the evidence, despite what men are saying, because what men say is not important. It's not relevant. And I've said that all through this entire talk tonight, is that listening to men gets us into trouble. But if you follow the evidence, God made the evidence. God made the universe. God made the Bible. If you listen to those things, it's unmistakable and inevitable that you will come to the conclusion that mind existed first, that God existed first, and everything points to that. And I think that's just what these guys are figuring out. They just need the gospel now. they need to listen to that mind, because he had some things to say.
Amen. Okay, we're almost done. I'll just read a few quotations from the last chapter for tonight, chapter 8, which is titled, Did Something Come from Nothing? Stephen Hawking wrote the following in his book, A Brief History of Time. So long as the universe had a beginning, we could suppose it had a creator. But if the universe is really self-contained, having no boundary or edge, it could have neither beginning nor end. It would simply be. What place then is for a creator? I concluded from this discussion, now Antony Flew speaks, I concluded from this discussion that even if it were agreed that the universe as we know it began with the Big Bang, physics must nonetheless remain radically agnostic. It is physically impossible to discover what, if anything, caused the Big Bang. Hume held that there is no cause of the existence of any series of physical beings beyond the sum of each member of the series. If there is a beginningless series of non-necessary existent beings, then this is a sufficient cause for the universe as a whole. Concerning the same humane argument, Swinburne said the following: the whole infinite series will have no explanation at all, for there will be no causes of members of the series lying outside the series. In that case, the existence of the universe over infinite time will be an inexplicable brute fact. There will be an explanation in terms of laws of why, once existent, it continues to exist. But what will be inexplicable is the existence at all throughout infinite time. The existence of a complex physical universe over finite or infinite time is something too big for science to explain. And finally, Richard Swinburne summarizes his exposition of the cosmological argument by saying, there is quite a chance that if there is a God, he will make something of the finitude and complexity of a universe. I'm sorry, is that finitude? Yeah.
The finitude, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
finitude
finite.
and complexity of a universe. It is very unlikely that a universe would exist uncaused, but rather more likely that God would exist uncaused. Hence, the argument from the existence of the universe to the existence of God is a good C-inductive argument. In a recent discussion with Swinburne, I noted that his version of cosmological argument seems to be right in a fundamental way. There are a few more chapters left after this. We will not dissect those. I would just encourage people once again to buy the book. Currently, it's only $8 on Amazon, and I provided the link. What is your commentary on this 8th chapter that was titled "Did Something Come from Nothing"?
Yeah, so I'll go back to what I teach in my physics classes. When you look at like the second law of entropy, or the second law of thermodynamics, the law of entropy, the idea that things are winding down. One of the things that I pointed out to my students is that if everything is winding down, that's the natural trend of the universe, and it takes work, and it takes a lot more than just work. It takes thought really to overcome the idea of entropy, and it's only temporary. Then ultimately, what's the universe going to do? It's going to end. It'll have some kind of an end. Even if God doesn't do anything, he just lets it come to its natural conclusion. The universe will naturally end. All of the heat will have moved to the cold until there's this thermal death where everything is the same temperature, and nothing can happen. And so
I heard that. I heard it from apologists long ago. I was like, dang it, I didn't know this.
Yeah. So if the universe is going to have an end, what else does it have to have had? And invariably, they will answer correctly. It had to have a beginning. So if it had a beginning, then we can logically eliminate the idea of an eternal universe, a steady state universe, and that's what happened in the early 20th century. Is that was something that was brought up for a while, and it was kind of put forth or whatever, but then eventually it got shot down and was discarded. And that's where the Big Bang came out of. In fact, I think it was the guy who was the proponent of the steady state came up with the title Big Bang as a mocking thing. And then when his steady state fell out, they kind of took that name and ran with it, or whatever. But so you have this idea of the universe had to have a beginning. And then when you get to that and you understand that there are only four things that exist, there's matter, energy, which are kind of the same thing, space and time, which I see those as two distinct things. They're related, but two distinct things. And then mind. Those are the four things that exist. We know that the universe is going to have an end, and therefore it had a beginning. That means that matter and energy, time and space, none of those are eternal. The only thing that's eternal is mind. And that's where I lead my students to. And that's where this argument is going to, is that first cause had to have been an uncaused. It cannot be. And this is, I guess, maybe a hobby horse of mine, or a soapbox of mine, is when you start talking about God and eternity, eternity is not just super time. Eternity is not infinite linear existence. I think eternity is a state of being that is superior to time, so that an eternal being such as God does not necessarily follow the same logical entailments that we have to follow, being subject to time. We exist within time, so we have to act in sequential order. We have to follow this. We have to follow this order of from point A to point B to point C. This comes next. This comes next. We're logical beings. We have to follow that temporal idea, but God is not. God exists eternally in a state that is so far superior to time. And so the atheists, when they come and they ask questions like, well, where did God come from? They are thinking that eternity is just superlinear time. It's like a bigger layer of time. And then there's little time that we exist in, but there's this bigger layer. And so they try to say, well, there had to be a beginning and an end. And it's not. Eternity is so much broader and different than what time is, so that matter and energy, space and time are all created things. They are not part of God. And that leaves mind. and only mind in an eternal state that exists. I have an article on my website, on my apologetics website, where it just I think it's entitled "On Time" or something like that, and yeah, and it just defines time from that perspective of time is not eternity. Eternity and time are not, they're not related things. Time is a created thing, is a separate thing from God. One of the things that he created, probably the very first thing he created, because you look in Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, there's the beginning of time. And then in 1 Corinthians 15:24, and then at the end, he will deliver up the kingdom, talking about Christ delivering up the kingdom to the Father at the end of time. You have the beginning and the end of time in the Bible. And then outside of that is eternity. And so it's a thing that is very hard for us to comprehend, if we can even do so. And for those of us who are familiar with the Bible and familiar with God, and have studied and understand to the extent that we do who and what God is, it's still a struggle. Now you have somebody who doesn't even believe God exists trying to comprehend it. And so their questions are based on silly things. And I think that that's what that argument, in talking about the infinite and talking about the mind having to come first, I think that all stems from, again, definitions, and how important those definitions are, and how important our knowledge of the Word of God is, through which God has revealed himself to us in a personal way. And I think that's the best way for us to understand. If an atheist wants to know the answer to those questions, they need to read their Bibles. That's the only way they're going to find the answer.
Ernie, thank you so much for these 2 hours and 35 minutes. I'm sorry for keeping you so late and for so long. Any concluding thoughts, either about like where can people find you, what is your website, where they can read your articles, buy your books, and also any short concluding message to our friends who are atheists and listening this and saying, well, trying to debate with themselves or with Christians, what would be your message to them?
Well, so I'll start off by saying that if anybody's interested in my apologetic stuff, all of my apologetic stuff is free. I will never charge for it. I think it's too important to put that stuff out there and have some kind of a barrier like money. So you can go to swordmasterpublications.fandom.com. Yes, it is a fandom website, because it was originally Wikia, but they changed it to Fandom. But it's free, and I like the way the website interacts with itself. I like the wiki format, and so I just put it there. So if you want to read my articles, you can go there and read those. I eventually am going to get a separate web page up where I'm hosting it, but that's what I can afford right now. So there's that. And then, of course, I'm on social media, whether you go to X or you go to Facebook or wherever, YouTube. I have a YouTube channel and stuff like that. All of it just Swordmaster Publications. As far as what I would say to atheists, the first thing that I would say is that God loves you, and he wants you to be saved. He wants you to be in that relationship with him. Second thing I would say is, I love you. I want you to have that relationship that I have with God. I want you to be saved, and I'm not out to get you. I'm not out to hurt you, and I'm not out to just win arguments. I'm wanting to win your soul. My heart breaks for you. And so I am coming at you with what I believe to be the truth, because I care about you, not because I hate you. And if they can understand that, and understand that I'm going to try to be as peaceful and as kind as I can be, and I'm going to make mistakes, and please call me on it when I do, but I am going to try to reflect Christ and the way that he was teaching others, with his patience and his love and his kindness. And if we can do that, I think again, environment and our approach are the two things that really are what are the problems that atheists face. And I can't do much about the environment, other than when they're engaging with me, I can try to make it as peaceable as possible, but I can really talk about how I engage with those people, and I can really make sure that I am doing the things that God wants me to do when I'm approaching these people. And I want them to know that God loves them and I love them.
It was a beautiful ending of this episode. I want to apologize publicly for butchering easily a dozen of words. Sorry, I'm trying.
I think you did great.
Ernie, thank you once again, and thank you for having patience for people like me who don't understand so many things about science, yet being able and willing to explain this to all of us. May God bless you, your ministry, your writing, teaching, preaching, doing this apologetic work, and everything you do. May God make you even more fruitful. May He expand your influence on people in the kingdom and outside the kingdom, so that they can come from the kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of light. By using someone like you, may He use you even more as an instrument of salvation to your neighbors and to people in the internet community. That will be amazing to see one day. Comments and testimonies such as like, hey, you foreigner thinking about, if they would talk to me, hey, you remember when you had Ernie as your guest? Well, his episode and his explanation helped me to, think twice about God and just start attending the church, pray, read the Bible, and see if it's true. That would be amazing. And this is what we do. I make peanuts out of this, but this is what we do, because we're trying to reach out to more and more people out there in this digital world, because so many people are suffering, so many people are in pain, suffering, dealing with addictions, with loneliness, depression, and all of things. This is why we make this content that we're making, trying to reach out to more and more people. I just want to say, everyone who went with us to this 2 hours and 40 minutes, thank you for your time. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for all of your kindness and prayers. Please keep praying for us, host Sean and me, including all my guests, and including Ernie, because all of us need your prayers to keep fighting, to keep making decent material for all of you out there. That being said, next Sunday will be my last live episode before I go on vacation. I will have this pastor, and we'll be talking about. This may be funny to some people, but I'm also a comic book nerd. We'll be comparing Jesus with Superman, and we'll be going into their differences and parallels. So that episode is coming Sunday. Friday, we'll come up with something else, and then there will be a period of about 3 weeks not going live, but that doesn't mean there will be no content. We pre-recorded several episodes that will be broadcasted every Friday and every Sunday until I'm back. That being said, may God bless you, and if you're an atheist, please go back to God, go search God with all of your heart, and He promised if you do that, you will find Him. Take care.
Thanks, Nick.